This was not just a war of trenches and artillery. It was not won solely with bayonets and barbed wire. World War I was also an economic war, one fought in gold reserves, in bond markets, in central banks, and in the secret offices of financiers who never set foot on a battlefield. The soldiers paid the price in blood. But the governments and bankers, they were busy calculating balance sheets. The moves made during those years didn't just determine who won or lost, they redesigned the global financial system in a way that traps you even today. If you think war is simply about politics and armies, think again. The First World War proved that money is a weapon, and one of the deadliest ever invented. In the summer of 1914, Europe was a powder keg. Beneath the speeches about honor and empire lay a cold financial reality. It was impossible to sustain a war of this scale without unimaginable sums of money. The brutal truth was this: when leaders chose war, they were actually choosing debt. At that time, the world economy revolved around the gold standard. In other words, money had a tangible backing. But war burns money at a speed that defies imagination. Germany was spending 10 million marks a day, while Britain was spending 2.5 million pounds every single day. The gold simply wasn't going to last. What did the governments do? They suspended the rules. They quietly abandoned the gold standard and told the public, from now on, the value of your money is backed only by your faith in the state. That was the moment money detached from the real world and became tethered to printing presses, credit, and the power of persuasion. Once states tasted this freedom, they never looked back. Germany was isolated from the rest of the world. Their only option was to borrow from their own people. They launched massive campaigns under the name of war loans. Posters featured heroic soldiers, and families were urged to forego luxury for the fatherland. They were promised that every cent would be repaid after victory. The result? 100 billion marks were collected, but it was a pyramid scheme built entirely on hope. When defeat came, those papers became trash. The savings of millions of Germans evaporated. This rage became the ultimate fuel for radicalism years later. Economic history never forgets, it only leaves scars. Britain had one massive advantage: London was still the financial heart of the world. But before long, even that heart began to fail, and the compass turned toward America. Banks like J.P. Morgan became the lifeline for Britain and France. Long before America officially entered the war, Wall Street was already bankrolling the Allies. This wasn't charity, it was a power move. American bankers made millions, and the U.S. transformed from a debtor nation into the world's largest creditor. If you wonder why the 20th century is called the American century, the answer isn't found on the battlefields, but in the accounting ledgers. When the war ended, the world was a ruin, not just the cities, but the balance sheets had collapsed. To keep the promises made to their own people, Britain and France tried to suffocate Germany with war reparations. The amount demanded by the Treaty of Versailles was astronomical, 132 billion gold marks. It was a fantasy. It was impossible for Germany to pay. As they tried to settle the debt, the economy sank further, leading to the infamous hyperinflation of 1923. People were carrying wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. This wasn't an accident, it was the direct result of impossible debts. And this chaos sowed the seeds of hatred for the future. So, what does all of this have to do with you? World War I was the moment governments learned they could finance anything with money detached from reality. Suspend the gold, print infinite cash, borrow from your own citizens, and then clean up the mess with propaganda. Sound familiar? Because this playbook has never changed. From the 1929 Great Depression to the 2008 financial crisis, every shock carries the echoes of 1914. When central banks say, "This is temporary," or "the fundamentals are sound," remember, they said the exact same thing in 1914, and millions were forced to believe them until the paper in their hands became worthless. The secret financial war of World War I didn't stay in the dusty pages of history, it formed the foundation of today. When money loses its anchor to reality, it turns into a tool of manipulation. Governments will always find a way to finance wars, bailouts, or crises, and you will always be the one forced to pay the price, whether through taxes, inflation, or the erosion of your savings. Real wealth is absolutely not numbers on a screen or the promises of politicians. Real wealth is resilience, knowledge, and the ability to see through the illusions. This is the only financial freedom history allows. History does not repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. The script written in 1914 is being performed again today with new names and new excuses. Those in power protect themselves, while the uninformed are sacrificed. The fact that money is being printed doesn't make it real. The fact that authorities call the system stable doesn't make it safe. If this story gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History holds the answers, I'm just showing you where to look.